Labadiena, su jumis sveikinas laida Delfi tema ir žurnalistas Vaidas Aldžiūnas. Mes šiandien kalbame tai, kaip NATO rengiasi ginti Lietuvą. Karas Ukrainoje regis tikrai suvienijo ir sustiprino Aljansą, kuris ne tik žodžiais kiekvieną dieną kalba, kad tikrai gins Lietuvą ir kitas Baltijos šalis, jeigu to prireiks, kiekvieną teritorijos centimetrą, bet ir Rytų, sparną, permeta papildomus pajėgumus. Kiek jų čia jau yra, ko dar trūksta ir kam iš tikrųjų ruošiasi sąjungininkai, jeigu prireiktų ne tik tai atgrasyti, bet ir fiziškai ginti Lietuvą. Apie tai mes šiandien pakalbėsime su NATO pajėgų integravimo vieneto NFIU vadu, pulkininku Peteriu Nielsenu. Good morning.
Good morning.
Labadiena. Labadiena. In simple terms, NFIU, with comparable example perhaps, if possible, without military or political jargon, understandable for anyone watching us, what is it that NFIU does, especially in this current context of war in Ukraine?
Yeah. The NFIU does not have any forces or soldiers under its command. It is a kind of a forward coordinating element from NATO, trying to link the host nation, Lithuania, together with the NATO command structure. So that's the primary focus for us, to link this and also to facilitate the reinforcements that, in case it's needed, can come in quickly and smoothly to this area. So, yeah.
Basically like an oil for the Lithuanian armed forces with the NATO...
Trying to grease it to remove the obstacles we see and to make the connections and so that everything works without any problems.
Okay. Well, I imagine there might have been some obstacles in the past, perhaps there are presently, but perhaps we can show the map on the screen of NATO forces in the region with the current posture. As you can see, Lithuania seems to be with 4,000 allied troops, not counting the Lithuanian National Armed Forces. How do you break that down, that number, 4,000 NATO troops in Lithuania? As I recall, the FP normally had 1,200 troops just a month ago.
Yeah, actually it had, I would say, 1,000 soldiers there, and then the reinforcements that we normally will bring in during the exercise, the certification of this unit that is here a half year ago, they were being brought in ahead of that. So they are here, and that's 500 guys on top of that, so we are having an increase of 50% of the initial manning, and on the top of that, there's a new air defense unit that is coming in now that is kind of on top of the original EFP structure.
Is coming?
Is arriving in these days or weeks as we're speaking here.
All right.
So that will also increase the capabilities of the EFP. So what you see now is an EFP that is fully manned, fully organized, and is training right now everything they can, and on top of that is being supported by more air defense.
They are called battalions, so 1,200 is a very strong battalion, but now we have 4,000.
Yeah.
So
it is a special battalion with a lot of what we call enablers. So they have a lot of add-ons that you put in with artillery, with engineers, with recce, air defense, and so there's a lot of extra stuff that normally you will see at a higher level, which NATO has added into this battle group.
I would like to talk more about that, but first, so basically this is a command structure, and now more than ever probably, the question is being addressed to political and military commanders. Will NATO fight if need be? Will it defend Lithuania? Now, of course, the Allied decision makers, they always stress it, that yes, Article 5 of NATO is ironclad, every centimeter of NATO territory will be defended, but why do you think this question pops anyway? I mean, is it because there are some fundamentals, perception there are still too few Allied troops in Lithuania, or that your message doesn't get across? Why is that question?
It's a good question. It's difficult for me to drill into why it's there, but what I can say is that we in the unit are prepared to stay here and to fight. I myself, I have my kit here, I have my rifle, a pistol, I have my protection gear with me, and the rest of the guys has that also. also. And I might send my wife home if things gets really bad, but I will stay here and fight with the Lithuanians because that is what my country has decided I should do. And if the defense staff is deploying out to tactical positions away from the building we're working in now, then we will follow the defense staff and make sure that there's connection back to NATO.
It is often said that if anything happens, EFP is integrated in the Lithuanian Iron Wolf Brigade, it rolls out and is ready to fight, as you said. How does that work exactly? EFP fights first and then asks the questions for the political governments later? I mean, I'm asking this question obviously because when it comes to Ukraine, there's always this argument that we're not going to fight in Ukraine because Ukraine is obviously not NATO member, but we're also not going to fight because that would start the confrontation directly with the adversary that we all know which that adversary might be, Russian Federation, potentially World War III, potentially using of nuclear weapons. Now, if you had to fight here, in Lithuania, same argument would still apply.
But
right?
I would turn it around because it's a different situation here. Because Lithuania, just as my own small country, Denmark, is part of this organization where we have the Musketeer motto: "One for all and all for one." So the EFP is actually handed over to NATO, put under command of a Lithuanian brigade commander, and it will fight, and it is ready to fight within a few hours. They have the exercises where they get an alarm, a message, so they have to go out, and they can do that within hours. So
they don't have to wait for the political decisions.
No. It's all there, and if they get that message, they will move out and be part of the Iron Wolf Brigade, and they will be able and ready to conduct operations from there.
Right. When I visited the EFP on January, I believe, then CEO of Battle Group was repeatedly asked, "Do you see the need for more capabilities, more boots on the ground, specific means to enable your mission and your tasks?" And he said no. He said he was comfortable with what he had, that it made no sense to, enlarge anything. And several weeks later, reinforcements rush in, and they still keep flowing. How would you explain that? I mean, the situation obviously has changed because of the war, but the planning was there, intelligent anticipation for this war was there, and the need for more capabilities was very clearly expressed by Lithuanian authorities. And if one day allies say we do have no need for more, and the other day they say that we actually need for more, how do you explain that?
Yeah, I think there might have been a misunderstanding because he probably have seen it as the whole structure, and the whole structure is including the 50% reinforcements that's coming in. Now, the extra that is coming after that is the air defense unit, which is add-on to that. But also, they're not alone here. We also have an American battalion in Pabrade, which also has been reinforced during the last days with indirect fire capability and also with air defense capability. So they have also been increased and reinforced. But I guess, as military commanders, we would always like to have as much as possible, but also within the realistic framework. But what we see now is actually that the Russians is withdrawing from our borders here now, Kaliningrad and Belarus, and they're facing Ukraine and being inserted there. So the threat, the real upfront threat is lower now than it was 3 months ago.
Right. Except that the anxiety that they may just return back to Kaliningrad and up to the Belarus border remains. Now, from your military experience, you served in tank units, fire support, planning, intelligence. What capabilities are still necessary to boost EFP? Now, you talked about air defense, it's coming here. There's artillery unit, both in EFP group and the American additional battery. How do you see that picture? Is it still necessary?
I think actually the EFP is very strong with these special enablers. So if it should be reinforced, and then it would be reinforced, I would say, by the NATO reaction forces, then the supreme commander of NATO would deploy the reaction forces here, and they will come in with a full package battalion brigade that is able to conduct a fight here by themselves, supported by logistic, of course. So I would say it's I cannot point of anything specific because they have everything, also nuclear, biological, chemical protection team that are experts on dealing with that. So they have what they need to conduct the fight. So would just be more of everything if we should have more in.
But in terms of air defense, for example, you are talking about short-range air defense, right?
Yeah, shorter range. That could be, of course, a bit longer range, and also missile defense system that could be be moved forward.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk geography. Obviously, Lithuania does not have as much operational space as Ukraine, and that probably affects planning somewhat. But there are one of the areas that gets particular attention, that's Suwalki corridor, or Suwalki gap, as it is called. The real one, arguably, is in Lithuanian territory. Little towns, villages, roads, railways, bridges of strategic value. I've been there last week and seen enduring Lithuanian army presence on the ground, but I have not seen Allied, not NATO, sort of a presence. Is that about to change, or is that ought to change in that particular area?
It's a good question, and I would not really know the detailed plans about that, but I know that it is a focus and key area for NATO also, because that area, as you mentioned, is kind of a bottleneck for the land connection to the rest of the Baltic region. So Lithuania kind of is a stepstone for that, but there are other ways to get to the states. Of course, as by air you can fly to Šiauliai, Kaunas, and also sail into Klaipėda and the other harbors.
If it's not restricted.
Right? Exactly, yeah. So but there are other options that is possible. But of course it's a main area, and I think that would be, if reinforcements come in, that would probably move into that area in order to control that area.
But is it, from a military standpoint of view, wise to do it sooner than later, now before the Russians are occupied, so to say, in Ukraine? They are very much stuck there, probably for a long period of time. However, the Suwalki corridor is mentioned several times over the past years as the most vulnerable place for the whole Baltic region. So again, the same question: is it ought to change?
No.
From a military standpoint of view, is there logic in that?
I think actually it makes sense what they're doing, because there's also a very big threat from Kaliningrad, looking at the indirect fire capabilities that are in Kaliningrad. So that is something that NATO needs to look into to take out before we move too close to that area with heavy big to remove, to destroy. So we need to do that before we move in with a lot of forces, because a lot of forces is also vulnerable. So that's there's a lot of things, and I don't know the details about it, to be honest. So I think they're doing what the right thing. There's a mix also to be up at the border to Belarus and to Kaliningrad, and then have some forces training in that area. So I think they're trying to balance that pretty good now.
Right. I mentioned Ukraine. How does that war affect lessons learned for the EFP? Now, I understand this is very early phase, but some preliminary lessons surely are being evaluated, right?
Yeah, it has, and I know there's a lot of talk going around on what we can learn from it now, but it's very difficult. Sometimes it's easier to wait until the war is over before you really take the lessons from it. But at least I would say the moral perspective is really come to something that is important here, where you see a small country, Ukraine, compared to Russia, with a high morale, fighting very well against some forces with obviously a lower morale, and that. I think it was Napoleon who said that has a factor of 3 to 1 to the real fighting capability. So the morale is really important. Right. But also on the technical side, I would say I think it's too early to say that the tanks are obsolete, because they have been deemed obsolete many times if you look into prior conflicts. But I think the integration, the use of the NCO system, and I think actually you see what Lithuania and other NATO countries has done to help Ukraine on the training side for the last 5-10 years is paying off now. So the decentralized, independent fight that is being conducted now, I think Russia is not really capable of knowing what to deal with that.
You mentioned several key points. Tank, as you're a tanker former yourself. Also decentralizing the structures, that they would not be hit easily by the enemy missile attack, for instance. But also one key point that you mentioned again, Napoleon, it's about logistics. The army marches on its belly. And we've seen lots of problems that the Russians have been facing in Ukraine because of the logistical problems. and there's a large logistical support from NATO countries to Ukraine. How important is that to your planning, to the EFP? War, high-intensity war, seems to be eating, swallowing the resources in a very, very fast tempo. And you must have a lot of it. And do you have enough to sustain, well, that kind of a fight that Ukrainians are facing? They've beaten all the odds. They've been told that Kiev would fall in 96 hours, etc., etc. Here we are, more than a month after, and Ukrainians are still fighting on. What about NATO?
Yeah, I can say that the EFP is sourced with the necessary logistic to fight the first couple of months. I don't want to say the detailed days on that, but I mean, the reinforcements are bringing in a huge number of containers filled with ammunition here, and there's a lot of activities going on right now in order to prepare the ground for these containers. So ammunition dumps around the camps are being created right now to have these containers put in, and the air defense unit that's come in with on top of that is bringing in also more than 100 missiles as part of that unit. So a lot of, they're bringing in the full kit in order to be able to fight for the first weeks independently until reinforcements and supply from the rear can come up.
You mentioned you are from Denmark, another small country in NATO. During the Cold War, it was, well, maybe not eastern flank, but still very important country for any important target, even for any potential Soviet invasion back then. We've seen plans with nuclear detonations, etc. The geography matters. History now is rhyming itself, maybe not repeating, but rhyming itself in curious ways. Are there any lessons applicable today for NATO forward defense conception? Is this concept for forward defense rather than forward tripwire presence that we had until now, recently, more than the flag, is it still viable in a modern warfare in the modern world in Lithuania?
I think there's two ways to look at this, and there's the host nation, the country that is on the front line, so to speak, what they could do, and then what NATO should do. And NATO first should try to, of course, to balance the need of forces that there are compared to the threat that is on the other side of the border. That should have a proper balance. And then also, and I know you are doing a lot of that work here, trying to make your own country as indigestible as possible to an aggressor, to be able to fight this independent, decentralized fight, even though there might be some forces that are being run over and they can fight behind the enemy lines and kill the logistics from that side, and then have a huge effect on the contact battle that will be conducted. So I think a mix of that is really good, where your own country is doing that, and then NATO needs to balance. And what we see now is also that NATO is responding to that. So the air, I mean, there's more than 100 NATO airplanes flying from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea right now, just patrolling, being ready to respond very quickly. And in the seas, carrier battle groups connected to NATO, and also other the maritime naval groups are filled up with ships from NATO countries, and they are one is up in Norway, cold response exercise. The other one is in the Baltic, and the one in Baltic will come back to the Baltic. So there's a lot of ships in the sea, and so I think that's a mix. Host nation and NATO, and I think
is that a lesson from the Cold War days? I mean, if it is applicable, considering that during the Cold War days, the forces, both Soviet and NATO, were enormous, larger than today, and their readiness has been obviously also. But I think actually I remember as a young officer during the last years of the Cold War, my nation was a frontline nation at that time, and we had this total defense concept where the nation could turn into that, and then we could everything would support the war, and I know you're working on that also. Exactly what we see in Ukraine.
Exactly, yeah. So the whole nation should be able to support the war and turn into that. So that is something we have demolished or got rid of now, because we're not anymore. But now, I mean, I know we're checking the bunkers now in Denmark also, just to be sure. So seeing into that as possible for some support, also as a reinforcement reinforcements coming in. That's also very important to have this. And I know you have it here where in Denmark, during that time, we had the harbor in Esbjerg where reinforcement could be sail in. We had Karup, the airport where planes would come in. So that is all that put together where reinforcements and the host nation that can take them in, that play is very important.
Okay, let's hope that all these preparations will not be needed for any real event.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. Mes kalbėjome su NATO pajėgų integravimo vieneto vadu, pulkininku Peteriu Nielsenu. Ačiū žiūrėjusiems, likite sveiki ir kitų kartų.